Hello. Today we'll be discussing something I actually mentioned last week, I do believe. Parian's ability, and specifically what Wildbow has said about it, which is that in the right circumstances, it can beat Behemoth. Or, well, if I go to the actual Word of God quotes and Word of God repository, it says that in Parian's early incantations, when Wildbow was riding her, it was mostly doing a Behemoth attack, yada yada yada, blah blah blah. Parian against Behemoth sounds like a joke, but you see there's a true use of Parian's power that doesn't show up in Worm. So this set off everybody's alarm bells because nobody likes doing anything more than just trying to brutally break a character and just make them so overpowered it's ridiculous. And so Wildbow has been a pretty damn good sport about this, and he's been, posting a lot about answer, replying whether they're right or not. Spoiler alert: no answer so far has been right. So, because there's been a lot of effort on everyone's behalf on Reddit and otherwise just to try and figure this out, and it's been a long time and nobody's gotten it. So, first of all, thanks to Tiny Alchemist and Ben Sutton and literally everybody else who's helped out. I'll link the thread, link the Reddit thread in the description. It's archived, but still a good place to start. And so what Tiny Alchemist says is that he found found that Wildbow quote, which I just said, and so he then just goes through. They go through the Parian's power, and so here's the described mechanics. Talks about it's lightweight materials. Then the problem is when it comes to heavier things, and how she can soak her TK into them somehow. And yeah, so she started using cloth, so because she could use it as a shell to trap the energy, stuff like that. Move it, uh, but she did say that it wasn't the actual intent for it. Okay, so now just also there is the Manton effect here. It doesn't work on animals, people, living, or freshly dead plants. Okay, so onto the list of basically everything that's been a note. There is no atomic or nano level control, no weather control by doing so. You can't use clouds of debris. You can't use dirt control or digging holes under Behemoth. You can't encase Behemoth. You can't make dolls bigger. You can't reinforce the dolls with an exoskeleton. You can't move allies around the battlefield or puppet the dead. Can't affect living matter, so you can't control plants. Can't increase the mass of Endbringers. Soak TK into herself. Can affect things like cotton and leather, which were once living but no longer no longer are. Can't use cloth tentacles to trip Endbringers or tie them up. Can't manipulate fire. Can't make cloth flame proof. Can't break up objects. No citywide telekinesis. Not a TK shield. No energy absorption or manipulation. Can't soak TK into clothes that don't form a closed container, i.e., like just a t-shirt rather than an actual fully enclosed thing. You can't do control bubbles or balloons or SpongeBob or Swiss cheese control, which I presume is just piecemeal control, like only controlling parts. Can't control things like sand, Shatterbird style. Can't use single reinforced thread to slice things like Clock Blocker did. Not probability manipulation, because if you're talking about quantum level butterfly effect stuff. Nothing to do with vacuums. Doesn't not using a power in a physical object in its own right, as opposed to using it to move stuff. Not manipulating threads of metal, conductive or otherwise. Not reinforcing buildings. Not the manipulation of light by any means. Once again, tiny level, micro scale stuff. Presumably, probably not anything that flies or otherwise leaves the ground for extended periods, unless Behemoth grabs it. That's an odd clarification. Does not involve multi-dimensional shenanigans any more so than any other power. Does not involve tying things to Behemoth to slow him down. It is not related to a power being used to contain the effects of any other power, including any secondary powers Parian has. Does not involve containment foam. So, the facts, sort of. Parian discovered this use near the end of a battle with Behemoth. She can't stop Behemoth, but per se, but can delay him, buy time, or slow his destructive efforts. Her power more or less works by creating a shield by imbuing a porous and flexible material such as cloth with a TK. If said cloth is watertight, so pretty watertight mesh, it can contain loose TK to some extent, but the shell remains porous and a TK can leak out / have more pumped into it. If something is too porous, you can't keep it filled with TK, which suggests a limited bandwidth. She only has so much capacity to a TK. Her power gets less accurate when controlling larger objects. Power imparts mass into things, which is one reason she can't or won't make things fly. She has only a little bit above human coordination, so it's not like Skidder level multitask master, but yeah. If she tries to control something too large, her power dissipates in an attempt to extend control to a multitude of tiny, lightweight objects. But it is not simply controlling a cloud of small objects, so, hence the no micro-scale stuff. The smallest object she can control is about the size of a needle. This use of a power first appeared in an unpublished snippet / short story, and as such should be assumed that this use of a power has to have been a satisfying end to said snippet. The use of a power first appeared in an unpublished snippet / short story, and as such it should be assumed that this use of a power has to have been a satisfying ending to said snippet. So, long story short, not a conventional use of the power the way we look at it. And I think I know why. It comes down to the quote about how she actually describes it. There was no instinct here. It was all forced, all clumsily hobbled together with the power that probably wasn't intended for this use. Now, what I mean by this is it's just most of these revolve around the whole idea of soaking things into it. She had fine control over lightweight materials. Now, there are multiple ways this could actually go. There are multiple ways this could be used. And the beautiful fact of the matter is, it's such a vague statement that you could bring most things out of it, really. So it's probably, I would have to say, the whole idea of soaking things into cloth it's not the right lead. It doesn't feel like that's the right direction to go into. I'd say it has to have some relation to the power, but I don't know, it's not multi-dimensional, which I've had a few ideas based around it, which include, stuff about the Endbringers, well, one of which is due to the extra-dimensional nature of Endbringers. She can sort of soak that into it, but obviously no multi-dimensional shenanigans more than any other cape. Plus the fact of the matter that is a very, very specific thing that doesn't actually do anything else, so in any other situation, which means I feel like the hint is the fact that this is a really unconventional use of the power in the first place. So we need to look for the more conventional use. Okay, so going back to the actual passage about what she's done about the experimentation. So she has fine telekinesis, but when it gets heavier than a ½ pound or so, the dexterity and speed gets worse, and then eventually it explodes, as in not explosion as in TK explosion, but it just dissipates because it just keeps trying to focus on little stuff and just goes. So there's definitely a focus on smaller objects. There's definitely a focus on smaller objects, and so the way she tries to work around that is that by controlling the telekinesis, she could keep it from dissipating by just constantly pumping more in. And she eventually hits a limit where she cannot make them bigger just because that more of a TK sort of just soaks out, just comes out of the porous material than she can pump in. But that's why she also uses cloth, and there's a limit to the size. Once she put enough in, she could it became a shell that trapped the TK energy inside, and that imbues it mass and force, and that's how she made the giant giant puppets, pretty much, that hit hard. So I personally don't really have that great an idea of what it could actually be, but I just thought it's one of the interesting things in the Worm fandom to have this kind of conundrum. And I feel like we just should explore exactly how it works. Because, there's been a lot of interesting guesses, but I just feel like everything's going on the wrong direction. Well, Half of it's going for more conventional uses of fine control, but the other fact of the matter is she has no multitasking or like coordination to assist in that, so it couldn't be anything in that direction. I feel like it's just gonna be something really, really ridiculously simple, like I don't know, she can throw things like bullets, like she gets that sort of, she can like, it's not really the case of she gets small micro control. It's not anything like that. It's just she can pick something up that's really small and just lob it really, really hard, which I guess would also. Oh yeah, another thing that people seem to forget is that a lot of these snippets do involve fléché. So I'm just starting to think that it's a case of her working with fléché and just chucking things. Like, it's the most ridiculously simple answer to this question, and it's slightly insulting because it's just so, it can't be that straightforward. But I don't know, I feel like it's just the one direction that nobody's really gone trying to figure this out. So personally, I'm just calling it as, she throws things, tiny things, and uses them as pretty much tiny ass projectiles. Fléché helps imbue them so they have the power to go through Behemoth, and there we go. Uh, Obviously, that's probably not the answer, but I would just like to hear a bit more discussion and sort of, I'd like to hear a few more ideas on this because it feels like it's, stagnated a lot. It feels like Wildbow is known for very impressive powers. He's known for being incredibly creative with how he makes stuff like that. But I find it would be a beautiful irony if this thing that we're overthinking so much is just simply she can use it to throw rocks and Fléché imbues them so they can go through Behemoth. Because if you think about it, she can't stop it, but she can delay it a bit. And I guess if you pull Parian's shots can do that in certain ways. It's not quite any of these, it's nothing to do with manipulating anything, no flying, no multidimensional stuff, not containing any powers, but not specifically anything to do with other powers. It gives her still that amount of control, and it's interesting. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like maybe it's not Fléché's, because not in conjunction with Fléché, because Fléché, obviously her power works in the fact that it just sort of overwrites everything. So I guess if that was to work with Parian, she'd have to either just make ammunition, which would be rather underwhelming, or just she'd have Fléché would have to imbue it with her one shot shit before, like, after it's fired. Otherwise the momentum wouldn't be able to be imbued because it just overwrites everything. But I don't know, I just feel like it'd be hilarious just to have it be, Parian picking up a rock and essentially super chucking it at Behemoth, and that's what stops him. Yeah, let me know what you guys think, because this is actually quite a interesting exercise in what and why. Like, it's quite interesting how it sort of works, but I feel like obviously I'm also missing a large chunk of it, which is the whole, why does it dissipate when she tries to control a large object? Is that just a sort of limiter, or is that something quite integral to this? I don't know. I'm just putting my guess out there as the most stupid answer that could possibly be the answer. And we'll see, if Wildbow wants to comment on this again. So yeah. That was a bit of a rant. I'll see you guys next week.